Hello, friends. In this episode, I'm continuing my reading of Henry Stephen Salt's collection of essays titled A Plea for Vegetarianism. In this episode, I'll read Chapter 9, The Philosophy of Cannibalism. Oh, yikes. It's Henry's chapter on cannibalism. If you've listened to any of the previous narrations or read the other chapters, you've noticed that Henry Stephen Salt enjoys satirical jest while never wavering from the severity of his heartfelt views. Please be advised that this chapter is not for the faint of heart. However, I just checked the animal kill clock at animalclock.org, and as of 1:55 p.m. Pacific on April 8, 2025, 14,815,268,994 animals have been killed for food in the U.S., so perhaps a bit of discomfort slithering through the satire-laden, albeit truth-based words of Henry is truly in order. Henry says, without wishing to weaken the just detestation in which cannibalism is at present held, I should like to inquire a little into the reasons on which this abhorrence is based, and to see if they do not lead us to wider and fuller conclusions than those hitherto reached by well-meaning anti-cannibalistic flesh eaters. In other words, suck it up, sit down, and listen. Please. Here's the next chapter in A Plea for Vegetarianism by Henry Stephen Salt. Chapter 9, The Philosophy of Cannibalism. Cannibalism is a subject which, though not pleasant in itself, must inevitably have some interest for those who study the food question, as marking the extreme limit of human folly and depravity in the choice of diet. It has of late been brought rather forcibly into public notice by the revelation of the terrible events connected with the Greeley expedition and the voyage of the yacht Mignonette. But as a rule, it is a subject on which people are rather reticent, and in the contemplation of which society does not greatly care to indulge. I confess I think this scruple on the part of our carnivorous friends rather too squeamish and sentimental, for cannibalism is not only a branch of that great flesh-eating system of diet of which they are upholders, but it is beyond doubt the most logical and fully developed realization of the principles on which that system is based. Cannibalism, like ordinary flesh-eating, may claim to be a time-honored institution. We read of cannibals in the history and legendary traditions of all ages, from the ogre Polyphemus, who, as Homer tells us, devoured the companions of Ulysses, to the modern savages of New Zealand, who did not hesitate to make a hearty meal off any prisoners, captives, or missionaries whom fortune might put in their power. Some writers have questioned the deliberate practice of cannibalism, but well-attested facts concerning many savage tribes leaves us no room for doubt that human flesh is often used by choice as an article of diet, and not only under the pressure of necessity or from the lack of other food. It is quite possible that there is a basis of truth in the grimly humorous stories told by the old Greek historian Herodotus of the cannibals of his age, among some of whom it was the custom when a man died for his relations to assemble and eat him, mixing his flesh with that of some animal to make it more palatable. Others again used to eat their aged parents, while a third tribe, the Podmans, carried on the practice of cannibalism in a more systematic and scientific manner. If one of their number be ill, said Herodotus, they take the sick person, and if he be a man, the men of his acquaintance proceed to put him to death, because, they say, his flesh would be spoilt for them if he pined and wasted away with sickness. The man protests he is not ill in the least, but his friends will not accept his denial. In spite of all he can say, they kill him and feast themselves on his body. It is indisputable that there have been, and indeed are, savage tribes who deliberately prefer human flesh to other food, and it should not escape our notice that these people, in defense of their dietetic peculiarities, might use, and probably have used, arguments similar to those nowadays brought forward by flesh eaters in justification of their system of diet. It has always been so. It is the regular rule of our society. Our medical men approve of it. We are strong and healthy on this diet. It is evidently the law of nature. It is much kinder to the victims than to leave them to die of a lingering old age. The world would be overrun with old and sick people if we did not eat them. It is absolutely necessary at times to take life. We must be practical and not give way to humanitarian sentiment. All these are fallacies which must surely have been employed by many a patriotic cannibal, as well as by the Englishmen who are determined to see no fault in their native beef. There is no lack of instances of a belief in the advantages of a cannibalistic diet. The Grand Khan of Tartary is said to have fattened his magicians and astronomers with the carcasses of condemned criminals, on the same principle, I suppose, as our clergymen and men of science find they need plenty of butcher's meat to ensure a proper fulfillment of their professional duties. Richard Coeur de Lion, according to an old English ballad, owed his recovery from a serious English to a Turk's head, which his cook dressed for him as a substitute for pork. The Caribbees were said to prefer sucking infants to all other food, and doubtless felt all the affecting partiality for this form of diet which Charles Lamb expressed for roast sucking pig. In fact, so many merits have been discovered at different times and in different places in human flesh when used for culinary purposes that it is to be regretted that no enterprising cannibals volunteered to open a department in the late health exhibition as a counterpoise to the vegetarian dining room and an encouragement to flesh eaters in general. But of late, cannibalism has for some reason or other fallen into disrepute, even among those who ought logically to be numbered among its supporters. Its scientific and systematic practice is now relegated to a few barbarous nations, while Europeans, although still addicted in the main to flesh eating, become cannibals only under the pressure of some great necessity, as in time of siege or shipwreck, and even then the utmost exertions are usually made by the survivors to keep secret the manner in which they preserve their own lives. When the fact became known that cannibalism had been practiced by the survivors in the Greeley expedition, the public conscience, as the daily papers informed us, was inexpressibly pained and shocked at these revelations. Now, all food reformers must necessarily be glad to notice any sign of the existence of a public conscience in relation to the question of food, for the principle to which flesh eaters usually appeal is that law of nature which prompts the stronger animals to prey on the weaker, and which is sometimes naively described by a happy inversion as the great law of self sacrifice. If once the public conscience can be awakened, it is possible that in time it may be inexpressibly pained and shocked by other things besides cannibalism, which are now established as mere everyday matters in our midst. So, without wishing to weaken the just detestation in which cannibalism is at present held, I should like to inquire a little into the reasons on which this abhorrence is based, and to see if they do not lead us to wider and fuller conclusions than those hitherto reached by well meaning anti-cannibalistic flesh eaters. In what then does the peculiar horror of cannibalism consist? Not in the mere taking of human life, for war, the profession of killing, is everywhere held in high esteem, and it is only of late years that dueling has ceased to be equally popular. If we are thought to be justified in killing our fellow creatures for the sake of prestige, honor, and empire, why should we be ashamed to do so for more solid dietetic advantages, if a diet of human flesh were considered wholesome and necessary? It is obvious that the popular aversion to cannibalism is based, and justly so, on the intuitive knowledge that such a diet is unnatural, unwholesome, and disgusting. The very word cannibal or dog-like is indicative of the popular sentiment. It is rightly felt that there are some foods of which it is filthy and dog-like to partake, and the public conscience is accordingly shocked when some shipwrecked individuals from time to time are found to have preferred such a diet to the alternative of starvation. On the whole, this is as it should be, but it is to be regretted that the public conscience should be so partial and intermittent in its promptings, branding as infamy the mad act of a few starving and scarcely responsible men, while it calmly ignores or sanctions an established system which outrages every feeling of decency and humanity. For let those who shudder at the horrors of cannibalism lay aside for once all the prejudice of custom and conventionalism, and think of the real meaning of the slaughter of animals for food. Let them track the beefsteak or the mutton chop, which they so greatly relish at lunch, first to the butcher's shop and then to the slaughterhouse, and finally let them seriously consider whether the upholders of such a system are justified in expressing any virtuous horror at the diet of which cannibals partake. They may call their butcher a purveyor and his slaughterhouse an abattoir, but they cannot evade that their own daily food is in its substance disgusting and procured by a process which is loathsome to all the finer instincts of their mind. It is said that the Papuan inhabitants of New Britain are accustomed to expose human flesh for sale in their shops and markets. This, if true, is certainly very sad and terrible, but it is even more sad and undeniably true that the people of old Britain look with perfect composure and satisfaction on the horrible array of dangling limbs and quartered carcasses which is everywhere to be seen along the main thoroughfares of the most civilized towns. If we wish to see cannibalism in its literal sense, rampant and unchecked, we need not go very far from home to enjoy this instructive spectacle, for the roast beef of Old England, as well as the roast man of New Britain, will supply a fruitful subject of meditation to those who deplore that dog-like perversity of appetite, which prompts men to glut themselves with food at once disgusting and degrading, while they neglect or despise the pure and simple gifts scattered everywhere by the bountiful hand of nature. That concludes Chapter 9 of Henry Salt's A Plea for Vegetarianism. I will continue to the last chapter, Chapter 10, next episode. If you'd like to learn more about the rationale for vegetarianism from a modern hero, I recommend Earthling Ed's book, How to Argue with a Meat Eater, even if, or especially if, you yourself are the meat eater. Several years ago, I started my journey with Meatless Mondays. A year later, I went to Meatless 6 days, then finally no meat. If you're still on the fence, I honor your journey, and even if you start with 1 or more days a week without meat, you will have a profound effect on the earth and your fellow beings. Thank you for joining me for the Peace is Here podcast. Until next time, sit with yourself in silence every day. That's self with a capital S. We are all scholars of peace. Peace and love to you all. Podcast music is Dalai Lama Riding a Bike by Javier Peque Rodriguez. A link to his music on Spotify and Bandcamp is in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, it really helps me if you subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Avis, and I write the Pedro the Water Dog Saves the Planet book series, which are a series of environmental adventure novellas. Books 1 through 5 are available at all your favorite online bookstores or at aviskalfsbeck.com. Book 6, Manu Mutante, is coming out soon. Go to aviskalfsbeck.com to be notified when new books come out. Thank you again. Listen for the peace.